Deflate your EGO with this powerful growth mindset. I used to think my ego was my superpower. It drove me, it made me ambitious, and I thought it was the key to my success. But I was so wrong. It wasn't my power, it was my prison. This is the story of how I realized the voice I trusted most was actually the one holding me captive, and how I finally started to break free. The invisible cage of ego. If you had to name the single biggest thing holding you back in life, what would it be? It's probably not your job, your circumstances, or the economy. It's the voice inside your head. More specifically, it's your ego. The ego is that narrator that tells us we're the main character in everyone's story. It craves recognition and validation, and it whispers that we're special, we're important, and that failure simply isn't an option. For the longest time, I hung on every word that voice said. I thought a big ego was a requirement for success. It fuels ambition, right? It makes you want to win. But here's the tough truth I had to learn. That voice isn't a coach, it's a saboteur. The ego tends to lock you into a fixed mindset. It can convince you that your intelligence, your talents, and your personality are set in stone. When you believe that, your main goal in life becomes proving to everyone and yourself that you've got a healthy supply of those good traits. It makes you fragile. It twists feedback into an attack, and admitting a weakness feels the same as admitting you're a failure. It even makes you secretly enjoy when others stumble because it seems to validate your own position. This defensiveness turns feedback, what should be the breakfast of champions, into a bitter pill. And if you keep reacting with anger or dismissal, eventually people just stop giving you the truth. You end up isolated in an echo chamber you built yourself. Think about it for a second. Have you ever avoided asking for help because you were worried about looking incompetent? That's the ego, protecting itself at the cost of your growth. Have you ever caught yourself talking over someone, not to add to the conversation, but just to prove you're the smartest person in the room? That's the ego. Have you ever held a grudge, replaying an argument in your mind so you could deliver the perfect comeback? That's the ego, refusing to be wronged. This isn't just about being arrogant, it's a quiet, corrosive force. It's why we get defensive in disagreements, why we shy away from a huge challenge, and why we get lazy after a little success. It creates a paralyzing fear of failure, because if our skills are fixed, then every single task becomes a final exam on our self-worth. A failure isn't just an event, it's a verdict on who we are. That is the invisible cage. It limits our potential, it sours our relationships, and it stops us from becoming who we're truly capable of being. I lived in that cage for years, and my escape wasn't some dramatic breakout, but a slow, piece-by-piece dismantling of the bars. My story, the fall and the awakening. My journey into the ego's trap started like a lot of people's do, with a little success. Early in my career, I had a couple of wins. They were enough to get me noticed, and the praise was intoxicating. The promotions felt like proof, and my ego, which had been a quiet whisper, started to get a lot louder. It started telling me, "See, you're different. You've got what it takes." And I started to believe my own hype. I became that guy in the meeting who always had to have the last word. I stopped really listening to other people's ideas because I was too busy planning my own brilliant response. I didn't see my teammates as collaborators. I saw them as competitors on a leaderboard that only existed in my head. Feedback felt like a personal attack. A suggestion for how I could improve was, to me, an accusation of incompetence. I was building a fortress of arrogance all around me and calling it confidence. The thing is, it was a brittle fortress. Because it was built on a fixed mindset, The idea that my early wins were proof of some innate talent, I stopped taking risks. I would only take on projects I knew I could crush, just to avoid any chance of failure that might crack my perfect image. My growth didn't just slow down, it flatlined, but I was too busy polishing my old trophies to even notice. The fall came eventually. It wasn't one big catastrophe, but a series of painful cracks in my reality. A major project I was leading failed. My first instinct was to blame everyone else, the team, the timeline, the clients. But deep down, for the very first time, a scary thought popped into my head. What if it was me? Then, I got passed over for a promotion I was absolutely sure I deserved. The feedback was blunt. I was tough to work with, I wasn't a team player, and I didn't take criticism well. It was a direct hit on the very identity my ego had constructed. I was furious. I felt completely misunderstood, like a victim. My ego went into overdrive, spinning these elaborate stories about how everyone was out to get me. For weeks, I just marinated in that toxic narrative, but the anger was exhausting, and underneath it all, I just felt stuck, hollowed out. My past success felt like a distant memory, and my future looked like a dead end. That was my rock bottom. And in that quiet, desperate space, the real journey started. I stumbled across two unlikely allies. The first was an old book of Stoic philosophy. The second was the concept of a growth mindset from modern psychology. As I started reading, it was like these two worlds, separated by thousands of years, were speaking directly to me. They were describing the very prison I'd built for myself and handing me the keys to unlock it. The framework for freedom, 2 pillars of growth. Breaking free from my ego's prison meant I had to completely rewire my internal operating system. I couldn't just tell myself to be less arrogant. I needed a new framework, a whole new way of looking at the world. I found it in 2 powerful pillars, the ancient wisdom of Stoicism and the modern psychology of the growth mindset. Pillar 1. The Stoic art of taming the ego. The first pillar came from the Stoics, philosophers like the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Stoicism is all about mastering your emotions and ego to turn challenges into opportunities for growth. The first lesson was on perspective. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about the vastness of time and space to remind himself of his own small role in the grand scheme of things. Thinking about this was like a splash of cold water to my ego. My dramas, my ambitions, my wounded pride, they were all so insignificant. This wasn't depressing, it was liberating. It helped me detach my self-worth from the chaotic, unpredictable outcomes of life. A famous Stoic idea, often attributed to Marcus Aurelius, puts it perfectly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The second Stoic principle was humility, not a fake, self-deprecating kind, but a genuine recognition that you don't have all the answers. The Stoics believed true humility is what keeps you teachable. I had to face the fact that my ego had made me unteachable. I had to learn how to say the 3 hardest words for an ego-driven person. I don't know. What my ego saw as weakness was actually the gateway to all future learning. Marcus Aurelius advised people to be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. My ego had me doing the exact opposite. I was judgmental of others while making endless excuses for myself. Stoicism flipped that script. It taught me to look inward first. Whenever I felt the urge to criticize someone, I learned to ask a question Marcus posed to himself. What fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize? This simple practice dissolves the need to judge and replaces it with empathy. The ego wants to be the judge, but your better self, just wants to understand. Pillar 2. The psychological power of a growth mindset. If Stoicism gave me the philosophical case for humility, modern psychology gave me the practical engine for growth. This was the work of Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck and her game-changing concept of the growth mindset. Dweck's research suggests there are two basic mindsets through which we see our abilities. First is the fixed mindset, which is the ego's native language. It's the belief that your talents are just fixed traits. This mindset is associated with a constant need to prove yourself, avoid challenges, and feel threatened by the success of others. It was a perfect diagnosis of the prison I'd been living in. The second, and the key to my freedom, is the growth mindset. This is the belief that you can cultivate your abilities through dedication and hard work. It's the understanding that your brain can adapt and grow, a concept consistent with the science of neuroplasticity. In a growth mindset, challenges aren't threats, they're opportunities. Failure isn't a verdict, it's just data. It doesn't define you. It's just a problem to be faced, dealt with, and learned from. This combination was everything. Stoicism deflated my ego by shrinking my inflated sense of self-importance, and the growth mindset gave me a new self to build one based not on being the best, but on always getting better. One taught me to be humble, the other gave me a powerful reason to be. Together, they became the blueprint for a new way of living. The transformation. 4 actionable steps to deflate your ego. Knowing the philosophy is one thing, but living it is something else entirely. Moving from a fixed mindset to a growth-oriented one is a daily practice about building new habits of thought and action. Here are the 4 practical strategies I used to systematically deflate my ego and cultivate growth. Step 1. Get good at asking for feedback. Your ego absolutely hates feedback. It sees any criticism as a threat to its existence. So, the most powerful way to dismantle it is to actively go looking for feedback. Don't just wait for it to happen. You have to hunt it down. Start small. Go to a colleague or mentor you trust and ask 2 very specific questions, recommended by the author Ryan Holiday. What's one thing I'm doing well, and what's one thing I could be doing better? This structure is brilliant because it's not a vague, how am I doing? It's specific, actionable, and balanced. When you get the feedback, your only job is to listen. Don't defend yourself. Don't make excuses. Your ego will be screaming at you to do both. Your only response should be, "Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to think about it." When you do this, you're training your brain to see feedback not as an attack, but as a gift. Step 2. Adopt the plus-minus-equal framework. This fantastic framework was popularized by Ryan Holiday, who attributes it to martial arts trainer Frank Shamrock, and it's designed to keep your ego in check by making sure you're always a student. You structure your relationships in 3 ways. Find your plus. This is someone better than you, a mentor, or a master of a skill you want to learn. Your plus keeps you humble by reminding you just how much there is still to learn. Your ego won't like it, but being around a plus is the fastest way to improve. Find your minus. This is someone you can teach. Teaching forces you to get clear on your own understanding. It turns your past setbacks into valuable lessons for someone else. When you're guiding another person, you spend less time complaining about your own failures and more time finding the wisdom in them. Find your equal. This is your peer, your sparring partner. They are at a similar level and challenge you through healthy competition. This keeps you sharp and motivated, leaving no room for your ego to get lazy or complacent. By intentionally building this network, You create a 360-degree system of checks and balances against your ego. Step 3. Practice gratitude and honest self-reflection. The ego is fundamentally self-centered. Gratitude is the opposite. It's other-centered. It's tough to feel arrogant and genuinely grateful in the same moment. Try a simple daily gratitude practice. Every morning or evening, just write down 3 specific things you're grateful for. It could be a person who helped you, an opportunity you were given, or even a tough situation that taught you something important. This simple act shifts your focus from what you've done to the people and circumstances that support you. Alongside that, practice looking at your weaknesses honestly, but without harsh judgment. Your ego wants to hide your flaws. A growth mindset wants to understand them so you can work on them. Acknowledging what you don't know isn't a sign of weakness. It's the kind of intellectual honesty that opens the door to real learning. Step 4. Reframe failure as data. This is where the growth mindset really comes to life. When you hit a setback, your ego usually does one of 2 things. It blames everyone else, or it declares you a total failure. You have to consciously reject both of those stories. Instead, look at the failure like a scientist. Ask yourself, what can I learn here? What information is this giving me? See every mistake not as a judgment on your character, but as a data point that can help you build a better strategy next time. This strips failure of its emotional power over you. Did a project fail? Analyze the process, not just the outcome. Did you get a bad review? Treat it like market feedback, not a personal insult. You don't truly fail until you start pointing fingers, because that's the exact moment you stop learning. These 4 steps aren't a one-time fix. They are a continuous practice. But with every piece of feedback you seek, with every conversation with a plus, minus, or equal, with every moment of gratitude, and every failure you reframe, you are slowly loosening the bars of the ego's cage. You are deflating its power and inflating your potential for real, limitless growth. Conclusion: the vision of a life without limits. Breaking free from your ego doesn't mean you get rid of it. The ego is part of our psychological wiring. The goal is to put it in its proper place. It moves from being the king on the throne to being a quiet servant who knows its role. It's no longer running the show. When you manage that, something amazing happens. The world opens up. All the energy you used to spend defending your ego, arguing, justifying, posturing, worrying, is now free. You can use it to learn, connect, and create. Life stops being a series of tests to pass or fail and starts becoming a landscape of opportunities to explore. Imagine a life where feedback feels like a gift, not a threat, where you can walk into challenges with excitement instead of fear, where the success of other people inspires you instead of making you feel insecure, where you can be fully present in a conversation because you aren't just waiting for your turn to talk. That is the freedom a growth mindset gives you. It's a quiet confidence that comes not from being better than others, but from being better than you were yesterday. It's a resilience that knows any setback can be the setup for a comeback. This isn't a final destination, but a path you choose every single day. The ego is persistent, so the choice has to be, too. But the journey itself is the reward. It's a path of authentic connection, meaningful work, and a deep, unshakable sense of inner peace. When you let go of the need to be right, you earn the ability to get better. When you let go of the need to look smart, you gain the freedom to actually become wise. This is the ultimate promise. You lose the fragile, noisy imposter you thought you were, and in its place, you find the calm, resilient, and infinitely capable person you were always meant to be. The first step on any journey is a simple commitment. If you feel ready to start this one, to choose growth over ego, I have a question for you. What is one ego-driven habit you are ready to start letting go of? Is it the need to always have the last word, the fear of asking for help, the habit of comparing yourself to others? Share your commitment in the comments below. Let's declare it, hold each other accountable, and start this journey together.